Bitcoin is everywhere these days.
Bitcoin is exploding in value.
Will Bitcoin go bust?
Some call it the future of finance.
Bitcoin represents the most certain thing in the financial universe.
Others dismiss it as a digital Ponzi scheme.
Cryptocurrency, the market, closely resembles a Ponzi scheme.
They are decentralized Ponzi schemes.
Whatever it is, this revolutionary digital currency is changing the way we store, spend, and think about money. But here's a question I've been thinking about, not just as someone who works in tech and crypto, but as an Orthodox Jew. How does Bitcoin fit into a 3,000-year-old legal system? Judaism has a ton of guidelines about money, down to the smallest details. And on the surface, Bitcoin sounds a bit sketchy. No one knows who created it or what their true motives were.
Who is the creator of Bitcoin?
The supposed founder and creator of Bitcoin is one of the most revered mysteries in all of cryptocurrencies.
And in its early days, it was especially popular with criminals running illegal businesses.
The FBI calls it the most sophisticated criminal marketplace on the internet.
The payment system is all through Bitcoins.
So, is Bitcoin kosher under Jewish law, or is it something we need to avoid at all costs? In the beginning, there was barter. I give you my Oreos and you give me your Doritos. But what happens when my thing is way more valuable than your thing? How do we do business? The simple answer is money. Something we all agree has value, so we can use it to make trades even if we don't have something the other person wants. But for money to work, we need trust. That's where banks and governments come in. To print money, track the payments, and keep everything fair. Today, most money isn't even physical. It's just numbers on a screen, credit cards, Apple Pay, Venmo, and it all relies on someone in the middle to manage it. For example, if I were to send you a $10 Venmo, first my bank would have to interact with my Venmo account, then Venmo would have to make the transaction, and lastly, Venmo would have to interact with your bank to transfer the $10 into your account. That's up to 3 middlemen just for me to send you $10. Here's where Bitcoin changes everything. It was designed to work without middlemen. No banks, no governments, just a system where everyone follows the same rules, enforced not by people, but by code. That system is called the blockchain. Think of it like a giant public notebook. But here's the cool part. Anyone can have a copy. Thousands of computers around the world keep track of the same list of transactions, so when you send Bitcoin, the network checks that you actually have it to spend. And if someone tries to cheat, everyone else's copy would catch it and nullify the transaction. So far, it sounds pretty kosher. Nothing in Judaism says you can't own a decentralized currency. But where do Bitcoins come from? They are created by the blockchain's code itself as a reward to the computers that help keep it running. These computers have to solve tough puzzles to verify transactions, and if they succeed, they're rewarded with some brand new, freshly minted Bitcoin. This whole process is called mining, and that's how Bitcoin works in a nutshell. But why do people actually find Bitcoin valuable? First is absolute scarcity. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. That's it. It's written into the code. Second is portability. You can store it on a phone, a USB drive, or just in your head if you can remember your unique Bitcoin password. No need to lug around gold bars. Third is divisibility. You can use a tiny fraction of a Bitcoin down to 100 millionth of a Bitcoin. Fourth is decentralization. No government or bank can directly freeze it, seize it, or get in the way. Finally is transparency and security. Every transaction is public. Everyone can see every transaction, but you don't have to reveal your name. So basically, Bitcoin is limited like gold, flexible like digital money, and free from middlemen like banks and governments, kind of like trading your Oreos for Doritos. Bitcoin gives us a whole new way to think about money. But just because something is new or valuable, does that mean we should use it? As someone trying to live by Jewish values and work in the tech space, I wanted to find out how Judaism views Bitcoin, and if there were hidden conflicts I hadn't considered.
The main focus of Jewish law and ethics when it comes to money is honesty. So it's incredibly important that when you are making money, spending money, donating money, that it follows Jewish law and Jewish ethics.
This is Rabbi Michael Caras, also known as the Bitcoin Rabbi, because he's famous for sharing his views about how Bitcoin and Jewish values overlap. He's even written a children's book about Bitcoin.
The main thing about understanding money, or what makes a money usage kosher, is that it's something that we understand its value. The shekel that's used in the Torah actually comes from the word mishkal, which means a weight, that it's known its value, it's known its weight, it's a verifiable amount. Everyone understands this value. And that's really an advantage of Bitcoin, because we know exactly how many Bitcoin there are, and we can verify exactly what a Bitcoin is and how much each transaction is valued.
In other words, Judaism values honesty, fairness, and social responsibility. So our use of money must be guided by stability, transparency, and accountability. But the real question isn't whether Bitcoin is kosher, but which rules apply to make sure we use Bitcoin in a responsible way.
You have to understand what Bitcoin is to understand which sort of area of Jewish life or law it should touch upon.
This is Rabbi Shlomo Einhorn, who explained to me that Jewish law draws an important distinction between a currency and a commodity.
Currency in Jewish law is something defined which is widely accepted as a medium of exchange, and the value remains relatively stable and standardized across transactions. Commodity is an asset that's not necessarily universally recognized or accepted as a medium of exchange. Its value comes from supply and demand rather than societal consensus on its exchangeability. Precious stones, wheat, so on and so forth. And which one is Bitcoin? That's part of the question. Is Bitcoin money or is it a commodity?
If Bitcoin is money, then it's subject to rules that don't apply to commodities. For example, Jewish law has specific rules about charging interest on loans, and those rules only apply to currency. The same is true for certain Jewish contracts and rituals. Some things have to be fulfilled using actual money. So what is Bitcoin? Is it a currency like the dollar, or is it a commodity like gold? There isn't really a clear answer. Bitcoin behaves like a currency in some ways. You can use it to buy things, and countries like El Salvador have declared it legal tender. But in other ways, it acts more like a commodity. Its price goes up and down, it's often treated as an investment, and in the US, it's treated as property for tax purposes and regulated as a commodity.
To argue that Bitcoin is a currency, you would say the following. It functions widely as a medium of exchange at this point with certain communities. It holds intrinsic utility in facilitating swift and secure international transactions. It shares a lot of similarities with traditional currencies like ease of transfer, widespread global recognition. Arguments, I would say, in favor of being a commodity is at times it could have significant volatility, far exceeding any typical currency fluctuations.
Friday's big story was the drop in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Unlike government-issued currency, Bitcoin has no centralized issuer or recognized governmental backing. That often impacts what Jewish law would view as broad societal acceptance. And many purchase Bitcoin primarily for speculative investment rather than a consistent medium of exchange.
In other words, Jewish law hasn't really settled this particular question yet. But that's not the only issue Bitcoin raises. Like, does investing in Bitcoin count as gambling? Jewish law generally prohibits gambling when it's based on chance and speculation. So is buying and selling Bitcoin considered investing, or is it more like betting? It depends. If you're treating it like a serious long-term investment, that might be fine. But if you're just chasing price spikes, hoping to get rich quick, some rabbis might see that as problematic. Then there's charity. Jewish law teaches that we must give 10% of our income to help others. So if your Bitcoin suddenly doubles in value, when do you give your 10%? When it goes up? When you convert it into cash? When you use it to buy something? And then there's my favorite question. Can you mine Bitcoin on Shabbat? The answer depends who you ask.
So my understanding is that having something run automatically is not a violation of Shabbat. So you have your lights running on Shabbat, you have your stove running with its hot plate on it. If your computer is just whirring away and doing its own processing, that would not be a violation of Shabbat. Definitely if you're running it as a business that has operations, employees that are actively working, that would be a problem.
But Rabbi Einhorn had a different perspective.
Mining Bitcoin on the Sabbath. So that's likely prohibited because we believe that even automated processes initiated on the Sabbath can violate some Sabbath laws. Yes, we don't run a business on the Sabbath, but we don't also make a livelihood on the Sabbath itself.
So, Is it allowed? Maybe. It depends on scale, intent, and interpretation. Like most things in Jewish law, it's complicated. I guess it goes with the territory when you're applying ancient rules to new situations. When people stopped using silver coins and started using paper bills, rabbis debated, is this real money or just a promissory note? When credit cards became common, rabbis asked, is swiping your card considered a loan or a payment? And now with Bitcoin, we're asking the next round of questions.
The Talmud compares Torah to water. Water is able to reach into almost all spaces. That's the nature of water, right? It's able to crawl into all areas. The Torah being like water means that it needs to be able to have flexibility to adjust and adapt to whatever the circumstances are.
Judaism doesn't shy away from change. It leans in and asks, how do we bring our values with us into this new reality? And the core value behind it all is integrity. No matter the form money takes, coins, credit, or crypto, Jewish law keeps circling back to the same big questions. Are we being honest? Are we being fair? And are we taking responsibility? And here's another important tension to consider when it comes to Bitcoin. Judaism teaches us to respect the societies we live in.
So we typically have a concept called Dina de Malchus Dina, law of the land. We follow the law of the land.
In other words, if the government you live under has rules about taxes or currency or financial regulation, Jews are supposed to follow them, which means if you live in a country that decides to ban Bitcoin, you're supposed to honor that. But history isn't always so simple. There were too many times when Jews suffered under corrupt regimes or fled from countries with only a moment's notice. And in these moments, the key to survival was having portable assets, something you could hide and carry with you. Gold coins sewn into a coat, a jewel hidden in a shoe. Knowing our tragic history, it's hard not to see Bitcoin's tremendous value as a digital escape plan, God forbid. Money you can store in your head that no government can freeze or seize.
Particularly with the history of our expulsion from so many countries and all of the discrimination and oppression, that it is potentially that Bitcoin could be a lifeline and a salvation in certain circumstances.
So, is Bitcoin kosher? That's like asking if an axe is kosher. It's fine if you're using it to chop firewood, not so fine if you're using it to chop your neighbor. The point is, Bitcoin isn't good or bad on its own. It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used to help or to harm, to build or to break.
Whatever object you have, it could be a technology, it could be a tool, or it could be any kind of commodity. It can be used for good or it can be used for evil. If you take your gold and make an idol with it, so that is taking something which is inherently neutral and then using it for evil. But you can take that same object and you can melt it down and you can use it for holy purposes. So it's our job as individuals to take all of the things that we have in front of us, all of these objects, all of our money, and to use them for good and not for evil.
Using it for tzedakah, making the world a better place, fair trade, community empowerment, that's a good usage of Bitcoin. It's like the usage of gold for the temple. But using Bitcoin to hide what one is doing so they can be involved in illicit activities, that's a total misuse of our alignment with the Bitcoin project.
Jewish values gives us a framework to build an economic life that's ethical, transparent, and compassionate. And what's amazing is that a religion founded in the time of shepherds and sacrificial offerings still has the tools to evaluate something as cutting edge as cryptocurrency. For me, that's both grounding and inspiring because I live in two worlds, faith and tech, Torah and blockchain. And the fact that Judaism can stretch across that gap, maybe that's what makes it timeless.